Hi everyone, thanks for joining in for our DORA exclusive webinar, How's and What's of DORA, powered by Typo. I'm Kovid, founding member at Typo and your host for today's webinar. With me, we have two special people. Please welcome the DORA expert for tonight, Bryan Finster, who is an exceptional value stream architect at Defense Unicorn and co-author of ebook, How to Misuse and Abuse DORA, and one of our product mentors and Typo advocates, Richard Pangborn, who is a software development manager at Method. Thanks, Bryan. Thanks, Rich, for joining in.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem.
Great. So before we get started and discuss about how to implement DORA, how to misuse DORA, Rich, you have some questions to ask. We would love to know a little bit about you both. So if you could just spare a minute and tell us about yourself. So I think we can get started with you, Rich, and then we can come back to Bryan.
Sure. Yeah, sounds good. My name is Richard Pangborn. I'm the software developer manager here at Method. I've been a manager for about 3 years now, but I do come from a tech lead role of 5 or more years. I started here as a junior developer when we were just in the startup phase, went through the series funding, the investments, the exponential growth. Today we're over 100-person company with 6 software development teams. And yeah, Typo is definitely something that we've been using to help us measure ourselves and succeed. Some interesting things about myself, I guess, is I was part of the company team that succeeded when we did a Intuit hackathon. It was pretty impactful to me. We brought this giant check back with us from Cali all the way to Toronto, where we're located. We got to celebrate with all of the company, everyone who put in all the hard work to help us succeed. That's sort of what pushed me into sort of a management path to sort of mentor and help those that are junior or intermediate have that same sort of career path and set them up for success.
Perfect. Thanks, Richard. And something apart from your professional life, anything that you want to share with the audience about yourself?
Myself, I'm a gamer. I do like to golf. I do like to exercise. Something interesting also is I met my wife here at the company, who I still work with today.
Great. Thank you so much, Rich. Bryan, over to you.
Yes, I'm Bryan Finster. I've been a software developer for, since 1996. So I'll let you do the math. Mostly doing enterprise development. I worked for Walmart for 19 of those years. In logistics for most of that time, and helped pilot continuous delivery of Walmart inside logistics. I've got scars to show for it. And then later moved to platform at Walmart, where I was originally in charge of the delivery metrics we were gathering to help teams understand how to do continuous delivery so they can compare themselves to what good continuous delivery looked like. And then later was asked to start a dojo at Walmart to directly pair with teams to help them solve the problem of how do we do CD. And then about a little over 3 years ago, I joined Defense Unicorns as employee number 3 of 3. And we're now over 150 people focused on how do we help the Department of Defense deliver, do continuous delivery in secure environments. So it's been a fun path.
Great. Perfect. And the same question to you, something that LinkedIn doesn't tell about you would like to share with the audience?
Computers aren't my hobby. I it's a lot better than roofing. My dad had a construction company, so I know what that's like. But I very much enjoy photography. I'm collecting watches, I ride motorcycles, and build plastic models. So that's where I spend my time.
Nice. Great to know that. All right. So now I think we are good to go and start with the main section of our webinar. So I think first, let's start with you, Bryan. I think you have been a long time advocate of value streams, continuous delivery, DORA metrics. You just briefly told us about how this journey started, but let's deep dive a little bit more into this. Tell us about how value stream management, continuous delivery, all this as a concept started appealing to you from the point of Walmart, and then how it has evolved over time for you in your life.
Sure. No, at Walmart, continuous delivery was the answer to a problem. It wasn't, it was, we had a business problem. Our lead time for change in logistics was a year. We were delivering every quarter with massive explosions every time we piloted. I mean, it was really stressful. Anytime we did a big change every quarter, we had planned 24/7 support for at least a week and sometimes longer. And it was just a complete nightmare. And our SVP, instead of hiring in a bunch of consultants, because we've been through a whole bunch of agile transformations over the years, asked the senior engineers in the area to figure out how we could deliver every 2 weeks. You can imagine these giant explosions happening every 2 weeks instead of every quarter. We didn't want that. And so we started digging in, how do we get that done? And my partner in crime bought a copy of Continuous Delivery. We started reading that book cover to cover, pulling out everything we could. Started building Jenkins pipelines with templates so the teams didn't have to go and build their own pipeline. They could just extend the base template, which was a pattern we took forward later. And we built a global platform. I started trying to figure out how do we actually do the workflow that enables continuous delivery. I mean, we weren't testing at all. Think how scary that is. Other than handing it off to QA and say, hey, test this for us. And so I had to really dig into how do we do continuous integration. And then that led into what's the communication problems that are stopping us from getting information so we can test before we commit code. And then once you start doing that at the team level, well, what's preventing us from getting all the other information that we need outside the team? How do we get the connection, all the roadblocks that are preventing us from doing continuous delivery? How do we fix those? Which kind of let me fall backwards into value stream management, because now you're looking at the broader value stream. It's beyond just what your team can do. And so it's been just a journey of solving that problem of how do we allow every team to independently deploy from any other team as frequently as they can.
Great. And how does DORA metrics and engineering metrics, while you are implementing these projects, taking up these initiatives, play a role in it?
Well, so, all this effort that we went on predated Accelerate coming out, but I was going to DevOps Enterprise Summit and learning as much as I could starting in 2015 and talking to people about how do we measure things, because I was actually sent to DevOps Enterprise Summit the first time to figure out how do we measure we're doing it well. And then started pulling together, some metrics to show that we're progressing on this path to CD, how frequently integrating code, how many defects are being generated over time, and how often can individuals on the team deploy. As deploys per day per developer was a metric that Gene Kim proposed back in 2015 as just a health metric. How are we doing? And then later when we started the dojo and platform at Walmart, we were using a metrics-based approach to helping teams. Continuous delivery was the method we were using to improve engineering excellence in the organization. We weren't doing any agile frameworks. It was just, why can't we deliver change daily? And early on, when we started building a platform, the first tool was the CI tool. Second tool was how do we measure? And we brought in Capital One Gia, and then we gamified delivery metrics. So we could show teams with a star rating how they were doing on integration frequency, build time, build success rate, deploy frequency, and code complexity, that sort of thing, to show them, this is what good looks like, and here's where you are. That's it. Now, I learned a lot from that, and there's some things I would still game today, and some things I would absolutely not gamify. But that's where I spent a long time running that as the game master about how do we run the game to get teams to want to move and show them where to go. And then later Accelerate came out, and the big thing that Accelerate did was it validated everything we thought was true. All the experiences we had, because the reason I'm so passionate about it is that first experience with CD was such a morale improvement on the team that nobody ever wanted to work any other way. And when things later changed, they were forced to not work that way by new leadership, everyone who could left. And that's just the reality of it. But Accelerate came out and said these exact things that we were seeing. It wasn't just a one-off. It wasn't just this, just localized to what we were saying. It was everywhere.
Yeah, totally makes sense. I think it's been a burning topic now, and a lot of talks have been around it. In fact, like these things are at team level, system level. In fact, I'm the McKinsey article that came out talking about dev productivity also. So I have actually a question there. So
I
when
should
you
article. Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, it's basically it's basically talking about individual dev productivity, right? People say that it can be measured. So yeah, what's your take on that?
That's really dumb. If you want to absolutely kill outcomes, focus on HR metrics instead of outcome metrics. And so I want to touch a little bit on the DORA metrics. I think I've having worked to apply those metrics on top of the metrics we're already using. There's some of them that are useful, but you have to understand those came from surveys, and there's some of them that if you try to measure them directly, you won't get the results you want. You won't get useful data from measuring directly. And they don't tell you things are going well. They only tell you things are going poorly, and you can't use those as the thing that tells you whether you're delivering value well. It's just something that should cause you to ask questions about what might be going wrong or not. But it's not something you can use like a dashboard.
Makes sense. And I think the book that you have written, How to Misuse and Abuse DORA Metrics, I think let's talk about that a little bit. Like you have summarized a lot of things there, how DORA metrics should not be used, or engineering metrics for that matter should not be used. So how do you think teams should be using it? When do the teams actually feel the need of using these metrics, and in what areas?
Well, I think observability in general is something people don't pay enough attention to, and not just production observability, but how are we working as a team? And really what we're trying to do is you have to think of it first from what are we trying to do with product development? A big mistake people make is assuming that their idea is correct, and all we have to do is build something according to spec, make sure it tests according to spec, and deliver it, and we're done. When fundamentally, the idea is probably wrong. And so the question is, how big of a chunk of wrong idea do I want to deliver to the end user, and which money do I want to spend doing that? So what we're trying to do is we're trying to become much more efficient about how we make change, so we can make smaller change at lower cost, so that we can be more effective about delivering value and deliver less wrong stuff. And so what you're really trying to do is you're trying to measure the way that we work, the way we test, to find areas where we can improve that workflow so that we can reduce the cost and increase the velocity which we can deliver change. So we can deliver smaller units of work more frequently, get faster feedback, and adjust our idea, right? And so if you're just looking at, we just need to deliver faster, but you're not looking at why do we want to deliver faster, is to get faster feedback on the idea. And also from my perspective, after 20 years of carrying a pager, fix production very, very quickly and safely. I think those are both key things. And so what we're trying to do with the metrics is we're trying to identify where those problems are. And so in the paper I wrote for IT Revolution, which was about twice as long as they asked me for, on how to misuse and abuse DORA metrics, I went into the details of how we applied those metrics in real life in Walmart when we were working with teams to help them improve, and also, using them on ourselves. I think if a team really wants to focus on improving, the first thing they should measure is how well they're doing at continuous integration. How frequently are we integrating code? How long does it take us to finish whatever a unit of work is? And what's our, how many defects we're generating over time as a trend? And measure trends and improve all those trends at the same time.
How do we measure this piece where we are talking about measuring the continuous integration?
So as an average on the team, how frequently are we integrating code? And you really want to be at least daily. And that's integrated to the trunk, not to some develop branch. And then also, people generally work on a task or a story, whatever it is. How long does it take to go from when we start that work until it's delivered? What's that time frame? And there's other times within that we can measure, and that was when we get into value stream mapping. We can talk about that later, but we want small units of work because you get higher quality information if you get smaller units of work, and you're more predictable on delivery of that unit of work, which takes a lot of pressure off. It eliminates story points. But then you also have to balance those with the quality of what we did. And you can't measure that quality until it's in production, because test to spec doesn't mean it's good. Fit for purpose means the user finds it good.
Right. Can you give us some example of where you have seen implementing these metrics went completely south instead of working positively? Like how exactly were they abused and misused in a scenario?
Yeah, every single time somebody builds a dashboard without really understanding what the problems you're trying to solve are, I've seen lots of people over the years since Accelerate was published building dashboards to sell, but they don't understand the core problem they're trying to solve. But also, when you have management who reads a book and says, "Oh, look, here's," and I helped cause these problems, which is why I work so hard to fix it. By saying, "Hey, look at these 4 key metrics. Aren't this can tell you some things," but then I start using them as goals instead of health indicators that are contextual to individual teams. When you start saying, "Hey, all teams must have this level of delivery frequency," well, maybe, but everybody has their own delivery context. You're not going to deliver to an air-gapped environment as frequently as you are to AWS, right? And so you have to understand what it is you're actually trying to do. What decisions are you going to make with any metric? What questions are you trying to answer before you go and measure it? You have to define what the problem is before you try to measure that you're successful at correcting the problem.
Right. Makes sense. There are challenges that I've seen in teams. Of course, Typo is getting implemented in various organizations here. What we have commonly come across is teams tend to start using it, but sometimes it happens that when there are certain indicators highlighted from those metrics, they're not sure of what to do next.
Right.
So I'm sure you must.
Well, but the reason why is because they didn't know why they were measuring it in the first place, right? And so, like I said, DORA metrics in specific, they tell you something, but they're very much trailing metrics, which is why I point to CI, because CI is really, the CI workflow is really the engine that starts driving improvement. And then, once you get better at that, you say, well, why can't I deliver today's work today? And you start finding other things in the value stream that are broken. But then you have to identify, okay, well, we see this issue here with code review, or we see this issue here. We have this handoff to another team downstream of development before we can deploy. How do we improve those? And how can we measure that we are improving? So you have to ask the question first, and then come up with the metrics that you're using to evaluate success. And so if people are saying, well, I don't know what to do with this number, it's because they don't. They started with the metric and then tried to figure out what to do with it because someone told them it was a good metric. No metric is a good metric unless you know what you're doing with it. I mean, if I have a tachometer on a car and you think that more is better, but you don't understand what the tachometer is telling you, then you'll just blow up your engine.
But don't you think there is a possible way to actually not know what to measure, but to identify what to measure also from these metrics itself? For example, we have certain benchmarks for different industries for each metric, right? And let's say I start looking at the lead time, I start looking at the deployment frequency, mean time to restore. There are various other metrics. And from there, I try to identify where my engineering efficiency or productivity is getting impacted. So can it not be a top-down approach where we find out what we need to actually measure and improve upon from those metrics itself?
Only if you start with the question you're trying to ask. But I wouldn't compare. So one of the other problems I have with the DORA metric specifically is that and I've talked to DORA at Google about this as well, is like some of the questions are non-specific. So for the system you work on most of the time, how frequently you deliver. Well, are you talking about 1,000 developers, 100 developers, a team of 8? Right. And so your delivery frequency is going to be very much relative to the number of people working on it, plus other constraints outside of it. And so yes, high performers deliver, multiple times a day with, lead times of less than an hour. Except that what's the definition of lead time? Well, there's 2 inside Accelerate, and they're different depending on how you read it.
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't mean that you should just copy what it says. You should look at that and say, okay, now what am I trying to accomplish, and how can I apply these ideas, not necessarily the metrics directly, but how can I apply these ideas to measure what I'm trying to measure to find out where my problems are? So you have to deep dive into where your problems are instead of just saying, hey, measure these things and here's your benchmarks.
Makes sense. Richard, do you have a point there? I think we have been talking for long. If you have any question, I think let's hear from Richard also. He has used Typo, has been using it for a while now. And I'm sure in this journey of implementing engineering metrics, DORA metrics in his team, he would have seen certain challenges. Richard, I think the stage is yours.
Sure. Yeah, sure. So my research into using DORA metrics stemmed from building high-performing teams. So we always we're looking for continuous improvement, but we're really looking for ways to measure ourselves that make sense, that can't be totally gamed, that are like standards. What I liked about DORA was they had some counterbalancing metrics like throughput versus quality, time to repair versus time to build, speed versus stability. It's a nice counterbalancing effect. And high performing teams, they care about stuff like continuous improvement. They want to do better than they did last quarter or last month. They want help with decision making, so better data to drive some of the guesswork about what area needs the most improvement, or what area is broken in our pipeline, maybe for like continuous delivery for quality. Want to make sure that they're making a difference, that they're moving a needle that ladders up. So a lot of times, a lot of companies have different measurements at different levels, like company level, department level, team level, individual level. So DORA, we were able to identify some that do ladder up, which is great. There are some challenges with implementing DORA, like when we first started. So I think part of one of the first ones was the complexity around data collection. So accurately tracking and measuring DORA metrics. So deployment frequency, lead time for changes, failure rate, recovery. They all come from different sources. So CI/CD pipelines, version control systems, incident management tools. So integrating these data sources and ensuring they provide consistent results can be a little time consuming. Could be a little difficult to understand. So that was definitely one part of it. We haven't rolled out all 4 yet. We're still in the process, just ensuring that what we are measuring is accurate.
Yeah, and I'm glad you touched on the accuracy thing. When we would go and work with teams and start collecting data so number one, we had data from the pipeline because it was embedded into the platform, but we also knew that when we worked with teams that the get data was accurate, but the workload data was going to be garbage unless the teams actually cared about using JIRA correctly. And so education step number 1 was, while we were cleaning up the data in JIRA, educating them on why JIRA actually should matter to them, instead of just it's not a time tracking tool, it's a communication tool. And educating them so that they would actually take it seriously, so that the workflow data would be accurate, so that they could then use that to help them identify where the improvements could happen. Because we were trying to teach them how to improve. We weren't just trying to teach them to do what we say. I built a few data collection tools since we started this. And collecting the data and showing where accuracy problems happen as part of the dashboard is something that needs to be understood, because people will just say, oh, the data's right. But, especially with workflow data, one of the things we really did on the last one I built was show where we're out of bounds, very high or very low. I talked to a manager one time. I was like, well, look, we're doing really good. I've got stuff closing here really fast. I'm like, you're telling me it took 30 seconds to do that unit of work? So, yeah, the accuracy issues. And MTTR is something that DORA's talked about ditching entirely because it's a far too noisy metric if you're trying to collect it automatically.
Yeah, we haven't started tracking MTTR yet. We're more concerned with the throughput versus stability that would have the biggest change at the department level, at the team level. I think that's made the difference so far. Also, we have a challenge with just doing a lot of stuff manually. So lack of tooling and automation. There's a lot of manual measurements that are taking place. So, like you said, error prone for data collection, inconsistent processes.
Yeah.
Once we get to a more automated state, I feel like it will be a bit more successful.
Yeah, there's a dashboard I built for the Air Force. I'll send you a link later. It might be useful. I'm not sure. Okay. But also the other thing is change failure rate is something that people misunderstand a lot. And I've combed through Accelerate multiple times. Walmart is actually asked to reverse engineer the survey for the book. So I've gone through the book in depth. Change failure rate is any defect. It's not an incident. If you go and read what it says about change failure rate, it's any defect, which it should be, because also the idea is wrong. If the user's reporting it's defective and you say, well, that's a new feature, no, the idea was defective. It's not fit for purpose in most, unless it's some edge case. But we should track that as well, because that's part of our quality process, and change failure rates trying to track our quality process.
Another problem we had is mean time to recovery. So because we track our bugs or defects differently, they have different priorities. So P0s here has to be fixed in less than 24 hours. The priority 1 means 5 days. Priority 2, you have 2 weeks. So trying to come up with an algorithm to accurately identify time to fix. I guess you'd have like three or four different ones instead of one.
Yeah, I've tried to solve that problem too, and especially on distributed systems, it becomes very difficult. So who's getting measured on MTTR? I'm sorry. Yes. Who's getting measured? Right? It's going to be, because MTTR by definition is when the user sees impact. And so really that's whoever has the user interface owns that metric if you're trying to help a team improve their processes for recovery. So it's just a really difficult metric to try to do anything with, unless, well, you can't, I've tried to measure it directly. I've talked to Verizon, Capital One, other people in the Dojo consortium. They've tried to, nobody's been successful in measuring it. But yeah, I think better metrics are out there for how fast we can resolve defects.
Yeah. One of the things we were concerned about at the beginning was like a resistance to measurement. Some people don't want to be measured.
That's because they have management beating over the head and using it as is the reason why. It's a massive fear thing, and it's part of it's a cultural thing. And as long as you have to have a generative culture to make these metrics effective. One of the things we would do when we start working with teams is, number one, we'd explain to them, we're not trying to judge you. We're like your doctor. We're working with you. We're in the trenches with you. And these are all of our metrics and not yours. And here's how to use them to help you improve. And if a manager comes and starts trying to beat you up with them, just, stop making the data valid.
Yeah. Well, some developers do want to know, am I doing well? How do I measure myself? So this gives them a way to do it a little bit, but we told them, you set your own goals. You improve yourself. Don't measure yourself next to another developer on your team or someone else. You're looking for your own improvement.
Well, I think it's also really important that the smallest unit that's measured with delivering metrics is team and not person. If individuals are being measured, they're going to optimize for themselves instead of optimizing for team goals. And this is something I've seen frequently. There was one with on the Dojo team, we could walk into your team and see that if there was filters by individual developer, your team was seriously broken. And I've seen managers who measured team members by how many Jira issues they closed, which meant that code review is going to be delayed, mentoring was not going to happen. You'd have senior engineers focusing on easy tasks to get their numbers up instead of focusing on solving the hard problems. Design was not going to happen well because that wasn't a ticket, and so you focus on team outcomes and measure team goals and not individual performance, because everybody has different roles on the teams. People know from an HR perspective, coaching by walking around is how you find out who's struggling. You go to the gimbal, you find out who's struggling. You can't measure people directly that way. It'll impact team goals, business goals.
Yeah. I don't think we measure it as whether they're not successful. It's just something for them to watch themselves. So it's
as long as somebody else can see it. I mean, this is a problem.
Individual. Yeah, it's just for them. It's not for anyone else.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, that's about it for me. I can think of the moment.
Perfect. I think, Rich, if you are done with your questions, we have already started seeing questions from the audience.
Well, there's one other thing I'd like to mention real quick before we go there.
Sure.
I also gave a talk about how to misuse and abuse DORA metrics, and the fact that people think there's 4 key metrics they focus on, but read Accelerate. There's a lot more in that book for things that you should measure, including culture. It's important that you look at this as a holistic thing and not just focus on these metrics show how well we're doing at CD. Cool, but the most valuable thing in Accelerate is Appendix A and not the 4 key metrics. So that's number 1. But number 2, value stream maps. They're manual, but they give you far deeper insights into what's going wrong than 4 key metrics will. So learn how to do value stream maps and learn how to use them to identify problems and fix those problems.
And how exactly, so just an example, I'm expecting an example here, like when you are dealing with value stream maps, you're collecting data from system, you're collecting data from people through surveys, and what exactly are you creating here?
No, I don't collect any data from the system initially. So if I'm doing a value stream map, it'll be bringing a team together. We're not doing it at the organization level, we're doing it at the team level. So you bring a team together, and then you talk about the process starting from delivery and working backwards to initiation of how we deliver change. You get a consensus from the team about how long things take, how long things are waiting to start. And then you start seeing things like, oh, well, we do asynchronous code review. And so I'm ready for code review to start. 4 to 8 hours later, somebody picks it up and they review it. And then I find out later that they've done and there's changes we made, maybe the next day. And then I go make those changes, resubmit it. And like 4 to 8 hours later, somebody will go re-review it. And you see things like, oh, well, what if we just sat down and discussed the change together and just fixed it on the fly and removed all that wait time? How much, that would encourage smaller pieces of work. And we could deliver more frequently and get faster feedback. And so you can see just immediate improvements from things like that just by doing a value stream map. But bringing the team together will give you much higher quality data than trying to instrument that, because not all of those things there's data being collected anywhere.
Makes sense. All right. We'll take a minute break and we'll start with the Q&A after that. So audience, please shoot out all your questions that you have. All right. We have the first question.
Yeah, so MTTR is a metric measuring customer impact. So the moment from when a customer is impacted or user impact until they are no longer impacted. And that doesn't mean you fix the defect. It means that they are no longer being impacted. So roll back, roll forward, doesn't matter. That's what MTTR is measuring.
Perfect. Let's move on to the next one.
Yeah, so there's some things where I can set hard targets on as ways to know that we're doing well. Integration frequency is one of those. You know, if we're integrating once per day or better into the trunk, then we're doing a really good job of breaking down our work. We're doing a good job of testing. Oh, as long as we keep our defects from blowing up, you know, we should be testing. But you can set targets for that. And you can also set targets as a team, not something you impose on a team. This is something we as a team do, that we want to keep a story size of 2 days or less. Paul Hammett would say 1 day or less. But I think 2 days is a good time limit. That if it takes us more than 2 days, we'll start running into other dysfunctions that cause quality impact and issues with delivery. So I've built dashboards where I have a line on those 2 graphs that say this is what good looks like, so the teams can compare themselves to good. Other things that you don't want to gamify, you don't ever want to measure test coverage and say, hey, this is good test coverage looks like, because test coverage doesn't measure quality. It just measures how much code is executed by code that says it's a test, whether it's a test or not. So don't want to do that. That's a fail. I learned that the hard way. Delivery frequency, of course, that's relative to their delivery problem. You might be delivering every day, every hour, every week, and that all could be good. It just depends. But you can make objective measurements on integration frequency and how long a unit of work takes to do.
Moving on to the next one. Any recommendations where you learn, where we can learn value stream maps?
Yeah, so Steve Piera and Andrew Davis released Flow Engineering, which is basically, because there's lots of books on value stream mapping, but it's from the past, but they're mostly focused on manufacturing. And Steve and Andrew released the Flow Engineering book, where they talk about using value stream maps to identify problems and how to go about fixing those things. So it was just released earlier this year.
Cool. Moving on to the next one. When would you start, and how to convince upper management they want KPI now, and we are trying to get a VSM expert to come in and help? It's a hard sell.
Yeah, we want easy numbers. Okay, well, you know, I would start with having a conversation about what problems we're trying to solve. It's very much like the conversation you have when you're trying to convince management that we want to do continuous delivery. They don't care about continuous delivery unless that they're deep into the topic, but they do care about delivering better business value. So you talk about the business value. When you talk about performance indicators, well, what performance are we trying to measure? And we really need to have that hard conversation about, are we trying to measure how many lines of code are getting dumped onto the end user, or how much value we're delivering? Are we trying to reduce the size and cost of delivering change so we can be more effective about this? Or are we just trying to make sure people are busy? And so if you have management that just wants to make sure people are productive, and they're not opening to listening to why they're wrong, I'd quit.
All right. Can we move on to the next one then?
Where's the next one?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Is there any scientific evidence we can use to point out that working on small steps and iteratively is better than working in larger batches? The goal is to avoid anecdotal evidence while discussing what can improve development process.
The hard thing about software in industry is that people don't like sharing their information, the real information, because it can be stock impacting. And so where are you going to get a scientific study from a private company? But we have a few centuries worth of knowledge about knowing that if you build a whole bunch of the wrong thing, that you're not going to sell it. You don't have to do a scientific study, because we have knowledge from manufacturing. The documentary The Simpsons, where they talk about the Homer car, where they build the entirely wrong car and put the company out of business because there was no feedback loop on that car at all until it was unveiled. Right? That's really the problem. We're doing product development. And if you go off and say, I have this brilliant idea, what was Silicon Valley? They spent so much money building something nobody wanted, and they kept iterating and trying to find the right thing, but they kept building the complete thing and building the wrong thing, and just burning money. And this is the problem we're trying to solve. And so if you're trying to get faster feedback about when we're wrong, because we're inventing something new. Edison didn't build 1 million wrong light bulbs and see if they worked.
All right. I think we can move on to the next one. What strategies do you recommend for setting realistic yet ambitious goals based on our current DORA metrics?
I would start with, why can't we deliver today's work today? Well, I'd do that right after, why can't we integrate today's work today? And then start finding out what those problems are and solving them. As far as ambitious goals, I mean, I think it's ambitious to be doing continuous delivery. Why can't we do continuous delivery? One of the reasons why we put minimumcd.org together several years ago was because it's a list of problems to solve. And if you solve those problems, you can't solve those problems with an organization that's not a great place to work. You just can't. And the goal is to make it a better place to work. So solve those problems. That's an ambitious goal. Do CD.
Richard, do you have a question?
Myself? No?
Yes.
No.
Okay. One last one we'll take here.
Yeah, so common pitfalls, and I think we touched on some of these before, is trying to instrument all but 2 of them. You could instrument 2 of them mostly. I think that, and change fail rate is not named well because of the description. It's really defect arrival rate. But even then, that depends on being able to collect data from defects and whether or not that's being collected in a disciplined manner. Delivery frequency, people frequently measure that at the organization level, but that doesn't really tell you anything. You really need to get down to where the work is happening and try to measure that there, but then setting targets around delivery frequency instead of identifying how do we improve, right? It's all it is how do we get better? Using them as goals. They're absolutely not goals. They're health indicators. Like I talked about the tachometer before, I don't have a goal of we're going to run at 5,000 RPM. I mean, number one, it depends on the engine, right? I mean, that would be really terrible for a sport bike. It would blow up a diesel. So we need to, using them naively without understanding what they mean and what it is we're trying to do. I see it constantly. I and others who were early adopters of these have been out screaming about this for several years. And that's why I'm on here today, is please don't use them incorrectly, because it just hurts things.
Perfect. Bryan, I have one question. Like when teams are setting these benchmarks for different metrics that they have identified to be measured, what should be the ideal strategy, ideal way of setting those benchmarks? Because that's a question I get asked a lot of times.
See, they were never benchmarks in Accelerate either. What they said is that we're seeing a correlation between companies with these outcomes and metrics that look like this. So those aren't industry benchmarks. That's a correlation they're making. And correlation does not equal causation. I will tell you that being really good at continuous delivery means that you can, if you have good ideas, deliver good ideas well. But being good at CD doesn't mean you're going to be good at meet your business goals, because it depends, garbage in, garbage out, right? And so you don't set them as benchmarks. They're not benchmarks. They're health indicators. Use them as health indicators. How do we make this better? Use them as things to cause you to ask questions. Why can't we deliver more than once a month?
So basically, if we are, let's say, for lack of a better term, we use benchmarks, those should be set on the basis of the cadence of our own team, how they are working, how they are designed to deliver. That's how we should be doing. Is that what you mean?
No, I would absolutely use them as health indicators, track trends. Are we trending up? Are we trending down? And then use that as the basis of starting an investigation into, why are we trending up? Why are we trending down? Okay. I mean, are we trending up because people think it's a goal and where there's some other metric that's going south that we're not aware of while we're focusing on this one thing getting better. I mean, this is Richard. I mean, you pointed out exactly. It's a good balanced set of metrics if they're measured correctly, like if the data is collected correctly. And you can't. Another problem I see is people focusing on one. I remember a director telling his area, "Hey, we're going to start using DORA metrics, but for change management purposes, we're only going to start by focusing on MTTR instead of anything else." No, they're set. They go together. You can't just peel one out. So
Got it. Yeah, that absolutely answers my question. All right. I think with that, we come to the end of this session. Before we part, any parting advice from you, Bryan, Rich?
Just what we found successful in our own journey. Every company is different. They all have their different processes, their own way of doing things, their own way of building things. So there's not exactly one right way to do it. It's usually by trial and error for probably each company, I would say, depending on the tooling that you want to choose, the way you want to break down tasks and deliver stories. Like for us, we chose 1-day tasks in Jira. We didn't choose long-lived branches. We're not trunk-based explicitly, but our PRs last no longer than a day. So this is what we find works well for us. We're delivering daily. We haven't gotten yet to the delivering multiple times a day, but that's somewhere in the future that we're going to get to. But you have to balance that with business goals. You need to get buy-in from stakeholders before you can get development time to sort of build out that structure. So it's a process. Everyone's different, but I think bringing in some of these KPIs or benchmarks or health metrics, whatever you want to call them, has worked for us in the way where we have more observability into how we operate as engineers than we've ever had in the past. So it's been pretty beneficial for us.
Yeah, I'd say that observability is critical. I've built a few dashboards for showing these things, and for development teams who were focusing on what we want to improve, they always found value in those things. But one caution I have is that if you are showing metrics on a dashboard, understand that the user experience of that will change people's behaviors. It's so important people understand. And whenever I'm building a dashboard, I'm showing offsetting metrics together in a way that they can't be separated. Because otherwise they'll just focus on one. I want you to focus on those offsetting metrics as a group, make them all better. But it only matters if people are looking at it. And if it's not a constant topic of conversation, it won't help at all. And I know Abhinata and I have a difference of opinion on data collection. I'm big on, I want real-time data because I'm trying to improve quickly. He's big on surveys, but for me, I don't get feedback fast enough with a survey to be able to correct this course correctly if I'm trying to improve CI and CD. It's good for other stuff. It's good for culture because it doesn't change things. But make sure that you're not just going out and buying a tool to measure these things that shows data in a way or has data that causes bad behavior, or shows or collects data in a way where it's not collecting it correctly. Really understand what you're doing before you go and implement a tool.
Thanks for that piece of advice, Bryan, Rich. With that, I think that's our time. Just a quick announcement about the next webinar session, which is with the pioneer of CD, the co-author of book Continuous Delivery, Dave Farley. That will be on 25th of September. So audience, stay tuned. I'll be sharing the link with you guys, sending you emails. Thank you so much. That's it for today.
Thanks so much.
I appreciate it.
Thanks, Rich. Thanks, Bryan.